To understand the Battle of Waterloo, you need to understand what came before it. By 1812, Napoleon Bonaparte ruled most of Europe either directly or through puppet states. His armies had crushed Austria, Prussia, and Russia, at least temporarily, and his genius on the battlefield was legendary and unmatched. But then came the invasion of Russia. The campaign was a catastrophe. Hundreds of thousands of French soldiers died, not just in battle, but from hunger, cold, and exhaustion. Napoleon returned to France with a shattered army, and the rest of Europe sensed weakness. Coalitions formed against him, and in 1814, after years of grinding warfare, Napoleon was finally defeated. Allied armies entered Paris, and Napoleon abdicated. He was exiled to the island of Elba off the coast of Italy, and this should have been the end. In reality, Napoleon spent less than a year on Elba. On the February the 26th, 1815, he escaped. He landed in southern France with just a few hundred men and began marching north towards the capital. The French king, recently restored, sent troops to arrest him. Famously, Napoleon steps forward and declares, "If there is a man among you who would kill his emperor, here I am." No one fired. In fact, the troops sent to capture him joined him instead. Within weeks, Napoleon was back in Paris, restored as the emperor, and this period became known as the Hundred Days. But Europe reacted instantly. Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia, former enemies who distrusted each other, put aside their differences for one goal. Napoleon must be destroyed permanently. Over 1 million men were mobilized. Napoleon was well aware that France could not survive a long war, so he chose speed. Napoleon decided to strike first. British and Prussian armies were assembling in modern-day Belgium. If he could defeat them separately before the Austrian and Russian forces arrived, perhaps he could force a negotiated peace. It was classic, divide and conquer. Napoleon marched north with around 72,000 men. Some were experienced veterans, but many were just young conscripts who were rushed into service. On the 16th of June, he fought two battles in a single day. He fought the Prussians at Ligny, and he fought against Duke Wellington's forces at Quatre Bras. Napoleon did defeat the Prussians at Ligny, but failed to completely eliminate the army, and this failure would come back to haunt him. Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington, was everything that Napoleon was not. Napoleon was a general that was theatrical, aggressive, and improvisational. Wellington was much more calm and defensive. After the initial skirmish that was the Battle of Quatre Bras, Wellington withdrew north and selected a defensive position near the village of Waterloo. And the terrain that he selected was absolutely perfect. A gentle ridge hid his troops from French artillery. Muddy ground would slow French attacks, and strong farm complexes anchored his flanks. Wellington deployed 68,000 men. Only a third of these were British regulars. The rest were a mix of Dutch, Belgian, Hanoverian, and other German troops. Some pretty reliable and experienced, but others were very new to fighting. Regardless, this is where Wellington would stand. On the night of June the 17th, rain poured down, relentlessly. The battlefield turned into mud. Roads became nearly impassable. Artillery sank into the ground. Napoleon planned to begin the attack early in the morning, but he delayed. He had to wait for the ground to dry, because his cannons needed to be effective. That delay of just a few hours gave the Prussians time to march, and this might have decided the entire battle. At around 11:30 in the morning, Napoleon finally ordered the attack. His plan was straightforward. He would fix Wellington's army in place. He would break the centre, and he'd defeat the British before the Prussians could arrive. The first major assault targeted Hougoumont. This was a fortified farmhouse on Wellington's right flank, and Napoleon intended this as a diversion. But it did instead become a death trap for his own troops. Though the French attacked repeatedly, through woods, across walls, into narrow courtyards, the British guards defended it with brutal determination. At one moment, the French soldiers even managed to force open the north gate, after which a desperate melee ensued. But, in a stunning display of courage, British troops managed to slam the north gate shut, trapping many French soldiers inside and killing them to the last man. Napoleon kept on committing more troops, and as Hougoumont burned, thousands of Frenchmen died, but it never fell to them. Following this came the main French infantry attack. 4 massive divisions under General d'Erlon advanced uphill in dense columns, tens of thousands of men moving like a living wall. Wellington's troops were hidden behind the ridge, and at the last moment they stood up and advanced. They fired, and volley after volley tore into the French columns. Frenchmen fell by the hundreds. And then the British heavy cavalry charged. The Union Brigade smashed into the French lines, cutting down infantry and capturing Eagle standards. But they overextended themselves and pursued too far, and the French lancers counterattacked. The British cavalry was nearly completely annihilated, and both sides paid very dearly in lives. Following this, Napoleon believed that Wellington was retreating, but this was a mistake. Marshal Ney, one of Napoleon's most aggressive commanders, ordered massive cavalry charges without infantry or artillery support, and thousands of French horsemen proceeded to thunder across the field. But Wellington's infantry was well drilled and formed squares, with their bayonets outward and their flags at the centre. The cavalry charged again and again. They rode around the squares, firing pistols, hacking at men, but they could not break them. Men and horses collapsed in the mud, and this courageous cavalry charge was wasted, and Napoleon's army was already bleeding its strength. By mid-afternoon, the French scouts reported something terrifying. Prussians were on the horizon. Blücher, the Prussian general, had not retreated east. He had marched towards the sound of the guns. Napoleon was now fighting two battles at once. He sent some troops east to delay the Prussians at Plancenoit, a village that would change hands multiple times in savage street fighting. Every soldier sent there was one Führer against Wellington, and time was running out for Napoleon. At the centre of Wellington's line stood La Haie Sainte, another fortified farmhouse. This was defended by German troops, though they had limited ammunition. After hours of fighting, the defenders ran out of bullets, and the French took the position. For a brief moment, Napoleon had his chance. French artillery moved forward and began blasting at Wellington's centre from the point-blank range, and this was Napoleon's moment. As evening approached, Napoleon committed his last reserve, the Imperial Guard. These men were legends, veterans of countless campaigns, and they had never been defeated. Their advance was silent, disciplined, unstoppable. Wellington waited. When the Guard reached the ridge, British Guards stood up and fired devastating volleys, and the Guards staggered, and under more fire, they broke. The impossible had happened. The cry spread across the French army. Panic followed, and Wellington seized the moment. He ordered a general advance. The Prussians smashed into Napoleon's flank, and the French army collapsed into chaos. No matter how hard Napoleon tried to rally them, it was too late. Over 50,000 men were killed or wounded at Waterloo. Napoleon fled. Days later, he abdicated for the second time. This time, the Allies showed no mercy. He was exiled to St. Helena, a barren island thousands of miles from Europe. He would never return. Waterloo ended over 2 decades of war. It reshaped Europe, and it proved that even the greatest conqueror in history could be undone by mud, by timing, and by men refusing to break.